Well, good morning, Northview. How are you guys doing this morning? It is so good to see you. Special hello to everybody who's joining us online. We're grateful you can connect with us today as well. Big weekend, as Sean mentioned, we remember those who paid the ultimate sacrifice, and our heartfelt sympathies to all families who have lost anyone in service in the line of duty. Our heart goes out to you. We're so grateful for the country we live in and the freedoms that we have and what we get to celebrate. This weekend is full. There's a lot of things going on this weekend. I know a lot of us are thinking about the race, and you're thinking about what's going on there. This was always a weekend when I was first in ministry that I knew I would be preaching. In fact, I would say I think I've preached more Memorial Day weekends than I have Easters in my ministry career, because the pastor that I served with over in West Central Illinois was from Speedway, Indiana. And so every time Memorial Day weekend came up, he was always like, "Nathan, you're up." And so he would come over here for the race, and he would, being from Speedway, like I always thought, that is the coolest name of a town that I've ever heard of. And I just had these imaginations of how cool Speedway, Indiana must be. Then I moved here and I visited it, and I was like, not at all like I imagined it. So, it's still, I guess, kind of cool, but it's not what I had in my mind. But, graduation season's going on, school's out for summer, all the parents and kids are excited about that. But I know the reason why you guys are most excited and the reason why you're here. It's not graduation, it's not Memorial Day weekend, it's not the race, it's not any of that stuff. It's because this is week 2 of the Big Ten, right? That's what you guys are here for. All right. For those of you joining us for the first time today, we are a crazy bunch, and we're grateful that you could be a part of it today with us. Now, we are in a series where we are looking way back in time at a moral code that God gave his people in the Old Testament called the Ten Commandments. And we're kind of taking a fresh look at it, looking at it through the eyes of God to see his heart, to see what he would want us to take away from that, and then also kind of bringing that into a more modern context through the life, ministry, and covenant that Jesus established. And how do we fit all that together, and how do we understand it? So that's what this series has been about. We're going to be riding this all the way through the summer. So we'd love to have you guys here at one of our 3 services all summer long. But commandment number 2, which we're going to cover today, is a commandment that says no idols, no idols. The fuller context is Exodus chapter 20, verse 4, where God says, "You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of their parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." Okay? So the first commandment we looked at last week, no other gods. He says there is no other gods before me. This week he says no idols. No idols. No man-made idols. Now what is this one about? Well, I think there's a sense in which anybody at any time in history might be more focused on things sacramentally than actually letting the truth come into their life in a powerful way. They might be more interested in the appearances of religiosity and try to do things on the outside that would show their reverence for God, but on the inside, they might be far from God. I think that's certainly a piece of this. But maybe what opens this particular commandment up for me the most is the extra words that are given to this commandment. Most of them, many of them, are very, very short. Not a whole lot of words. God doesn't have to explain a whole lot. Do not murder. Do not covet. Do not steal. But this one, he gives some extra context to. He kind of walks out a few verses of explanation. And one of the things that comes out in this extra explanation is, he says, the reason why I don't want you to have any other idols is because I am a jealous God. When our ears hear the word jealous, we almost immediately think of jealousy as a negative thing. It's kind of a negative emotion. If you're jealous or if you're accused of being jealous, we would think of that almost like a bad thing. But clearly in this context, it's a different kind of jealousy, and it's an appropriate thing. And specifically, it's a jealousy that's related to the fact that God wants an exclusive, not an open relationship with you and I. He's not interested in anybody else having the same level of allegiance that we have with him. And my mind instantly goes to my relationship with my wife. And that's a place where jealousy can actually be appropriate and pure and right. If you were to imagine in your mind's eye that you were in a restaurant and you saw across the way, I think that's Nathan. And it looks and appears like he's having a romantic dinner with somebody, but it's not Jamie. You would go, that's not right. That's not right. And what would you do, or how would you think she might react, Jamie, if news of that got back to her ears? Would she just react like, oh, I'm good with that? Or would she be burning with some sort of form of jealousy? In the right way, that's exactly what it would be. Because her and I have an exclusive relationship. We are joined together. God is saying, I am in an exclusive relationship with you. I am a jealous God. I am not interested in you having any other interest to get above me or in your life or more valuable than me. Similar to what we experienced or talked about last week, but a little nuanced in that there are things of this earth that we might create or be tempted to shape our lives around that are clearly created things, not the Creator himself. Where he speaks into it and he says, I want you to be in an exclusive relationship with me. I'm jealous. I'm not interested in anything less than total allegiance. That's one thing that this extra language around this command really draw our attention to. The other thing is the generational impact, and maybe you heard that, where he was talking about the punishment of the next generation, 3 and 4 down the line, but then also the blessing of 1,000 generations of those who obey. There's this idea that on this particular command, maybe even more than others, that there is something to the multi-generational aspect of what we worship that has a spillover effect onto our next generations. We pass a lot of things down genetically to our kids. Like it's fascinating for me to look at pictures or to be around a table with some of my relatives or Jamie's relatives or whatever. And you can just, you know what I'm talking about. You can like look around a room of relatives and go, I can tell you're all related. You all have the same hairline, or you have the same lack thereof hairline, or you have the same mannerisms. You have the same speech patterns. You laugh similar. Your eyes are the same. Maybe there's an athletic trait or a height or some sort of skill that you see in someone that's been a part of somebody else's life in your family, and you see that passed down. I see your chin. That looks like her chin, right? We see it's really cool to do that. I love that stuff. Again, body language is one of those things that I have noticed in my family that has been passed down. If you watch a group of rector men walk into a room and sit down at a table, you'll go, oh, they're all related. They're all related. I mean, that same kind of frumpy, weird, I don't know how to describe it, walk that we do it's just part of us, you know, the no butt, flat back, you know, kind of thing. That's rector men. That's us. And I've learned, like, even as we sit, there is a posture. Several years ago, my parents were at a baseball game. They were at a St. Louis Cardinals baseball game, and I knew they were going to be at the game, and they told me they had good seats, and it was on the third base side, sitting down kind of low. And at some point in the middle of the game, I had a chance to tune in. And just guessing that they were going to be down low enough that maybe would be in view for a right-handed batter, I was kind of curious. Whenever a right-handed batter would come up, I'd kind of scan the screen to see if I could see mom and dad. And I don't think I watched it 30 seconds or a minute, and I see mom and dad sitting in the stands. Now, you might not see them. But if you look a little closer, there he is. I've seen that man. You can go to the next one. I've seen that man my whole life sitting in that same posture everywhere he goes. Arms crossed, kind of a scowl on his face, slightly disinterested. Like, you're going to have to do something to impress me here, man. Like, to make me smile, you're going to have to do. I've seen it, and my whole life. And I mean, in an instant, I picked that out with posture. Full disclosure, I find myself sitting in the same way all the time. Back locked out because it's just comfortable. I've been slouching too long. Arms crossed, scowl on my face. I'm not meaning to come across angry, I'm not trying to communicate, but my face just does sometimes. I'm actually thinking about things, and my face and what's going on there is not computing. And whenever I catch myself, arms crossed, back locked, I instantly freak out, and I just go back to slouching. So I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that because that reminds me of my dad and how he sits. But honestly, it's comfortable, and that's why I keep sitting like that. For my body, that's how I want to sit, to be comfortable, and I got that from my dad. So my kids, watch out. It's coming. It's coming. And one day you're going to have your legs crossed in a particular way, and you're going to go, that's just like Dad sat. That's just like his arms. It's crazy what we pass on one generation to another and how we can see that and go, yep, I've seen that before. But don't we all wish that all we passed on one generation to the next was just eye color, hairstyles, laughing patterns, and body gestures, mannerisms? If it just could stop there, we would all be okay. But the truth is that all of us in our families could rewind the tape and could look generation after generation after generation and see a pattern of similar struggles. Some of the same things that you struggle with is what your mom or dad struggled with, their mom or dad struggled with. Some of the same patterns in wrestling and potential struggles in a relationship with God, things that have gotten in front of a relationship with God are there in their life. And it's not their fault in total, because some of it is what's been passed down to them. Now, they've had an opportunity to move and to react to God in their own way, but what I'm saying is there are some predisposed natures that we all have, things that have been handed down. This verse really starts to come alive in front of us when we start to realize, I've seen this. Like, I've lived this. I've seen what 3 and 4 generations worth of spillover, sin, and a struggle with idolatry can have in my family's life. Now, let's be real. Most of us don't have wooden figurines in our house that we're bowing down to. So when you think of idolatry and you think of what did this mean in this original context compared to today, it means something different. It looks very, very different. But the idea that something is coming in front of a relationship with God, something that's created, not of the Creator, is very, very real. Maybe I could ask a handful of questions that would help you identify some of the idols in your life so that this command starts to have a little more of a place of understanding in your life. These questions come out of a book called Gods at War by Kyle Idleman. And these questions I felt like really helped me identify what truly is vying for a spot in my life in front of God. Answer this question in your own mind. What disappoints me? What is it that is regularly disappointing me and causing me to be discouraged in life? Disappointment can reveal where we have placed hope, maybe even unrealistic or disproportionate hope. And when that hope is not realized, we get disappointed. Maybe it's a job, and that job is continually seen in your mind as what's most important. And when it doesn't work the way you want it to work, or doesn't pay the way you want it to pay, or the promotion doesn't come that you were seeking, you begin to get disappointment. Maybe it's a relationship, a marriage, or a relationship with your kids. Maybe it's your sports team. Guys, I had to get honest with God a few years ago that I was letting what happened between the sidelines or on the court affect the way I was living the next 2 days of the weekend way too much. I was letting it spill over into my relationship with my wife and my kids over a game. I was placing too much hope and too much expectation in a team that was never, ever going to be able to win at the level that I dreamed they might. And it was actually causing a real ugly side to come out. What do I complain about the most? What do I complain about? Often the complaints and the whining show what has power over us. Well, it's the opposite of worshiping God and remembering who He is. It's the opposite of contentment. It's the opposite of being satisfied in God. We complain and we complain and we complain. Maybe that complaint is identifying something. Where do I make financial sacrifices? Honestly, most of us, if we were to go log into our online banking or look at our checkbook, we'd be able to see pretty readily where our idols are. What's the number one thing the biggest charge or the biggest check you write every month? Number 2 or 3 or 4. They'll all tell a story about what you value and what's important to you in your life. What worries me? What worries me? Are there anxieties, maybe even debilitating ones, that are taking the vibrancy of life away from me and stealing the joy that could otherwise be mine? And do those worries highlight that there is something that I am holding on to disproportionately? Here's one. Where's my sanctuary? When life is heavy, or I'm hurting, or I'm looking for emotional rescue, where do I go? Is it on a screen? Is it numbing out mindlessly on social media for hours? Is it through something illicit? Is it through an addiction? Where am I going? When I'm hurting and emotionally trying to recover, where is my sanctuary? You may find there an idol. What infuriates me? What infuriates me? Often, when I get really, really angry, it's because I have placed control or an ideal that I hold dear up as valuable or important, and all of a sudden, that reality is not being lived out. And it may be an idol that I'm holding on to a piece of. My anger is connected to something that I'm disproportionately holding on to. What about this? What are my dreams? What are my dreams? It's good to have dreams. It's good to look ahead into the future and to want and to desire and to have a vision for a life that moves towards greater vibrancy. But is the purpose of that next step that you dream about for your glory? Or is it for God's? These questions start to dig into the soul a little bit. They start to highlight what may be what we are putting out in front of God. And the bottom line with idols is that they are poor substitutes for an omnipotent God. That they are poor substitutes for a God who can create the world out of nothing, who can raise the dead back to life. They are poor substitutes. They tell a lie that they can't back up. The lie says, if you pursue me, if you worship me, then I will fulfill you. But they can't honor that day after day, year after year. They don't. They're not. There's an inability for them to do it. They never deliver on what they promise. God knows this because He's created us to be worshipers. I know that when we hear the word worship, many of us hear something other than what we feel like we are. And when we hear the word worship, we think songs and, choir and band and arms raised, and you might go, I don't know that I'm really much of a worshiper. No, if you have a heart beating right now, you are a worshiper. God made you to be a worshiper. You don't get to be human and not be a worshiper. It's part of who we are. It's a matter of what you worship. Worship is not an elective class in life. The only choice you have is what to worship, to choose what you will worship. But you are a worshiper. You are pursuing someone or something with your life. It's one of those things that, like our graduates this year, class of 2024. Congratulations, class of 2024. All kinds of years and life and vibrancy out in front of you. If I could tell you anything, it would be this: what you worship will determine the trajectory of your life. What you choose to worship, what you choose to value, will determine the trajectory of your life. And I know at 18, it feels like, I don't know, that seems a little bit, big and heavy and whatever. But promise you, your parents and your parents' parents remember being 18, and they live their life, and as they rewind the tape on that, the big struggles that they've had in life have been connected to the things that they worshiped over God. We don't want you to have to experience that. We don't want you to have to go through the heartache that we've gone through. We want you to know and to trust and to take a step right now before the problems come to say, I will worship God above all things in my life. He will be the most important thing for me. What you give your life to will determine the course of your life. It's a struggle. It's a constant struggle. I'd love to tell you that, these commandments were given and the people responded and God never had to intervene or talk anymore with them. He just went, oh, I said it, you obeyed it, good. No. I mean, they seemingly couldn't go 10 minutes without breaking this commandment. Moses comes down after spending some time with God up on the mountain, and he finds that his brother, kind of his co-leader, has gotten everybody to build a golden calf and worship it. They were so ingrained with that culture of like a created thing must have value over the unseen creator God. Of course, Moses gets upset, breaks the tablets. I mean, it just didn't take that long. And it wouldn't just be one time. It would be over and over and over again. Moses would lead the people after this to the edge of the promised land. He would send out some spies to scope it out. God said, this is your land. I'm giving this to you. But guess what? It was inhabited by some evil people. And like there was going to have to be faith required. It wasn't just cotton candy and bubble gum and yellow brick road to the promised land. There were going to be battles and struggles. And the people were like, I don't know, God. I don't know. And all of a sudden they started to value and worship and worry things that weren't things they needed to value and worry and worship. It messed up the relationship with God. He had brought them and delivered them out of Egypt. He was with them, very visibly present in the moment. And yet when he called them to take a step of faith, they were like, no. We don't want to do that. And what happened? God said, okay, then you won't step into that promised land. If you're not ready to worship, and if you're not ready to serve, and you're not ready to follow me wholeheartedly, then you will not receive that blessing. And that entire generation of adults that said no to God in that moment had to die off before the nation could move forward into that next reality. That's exactly what happened. You know, when God said here that if you worship other idols, that pain and that struggle will be passed on to the third and fourth generations, they lived it. They lived it. That generation of adults that didn't trust God, they had kids, and then their kids had kids, and they were stuck. Those kids and the kids' kids. They were stuck because of the decisions mom and dad and grandpa made. For 40 years, they wandered too. Wherever mom and dad went, not for things they did, but because of the sins of somebody else. That gets real, doesn't it? We've seen this in real life. We've seen where the pain that one generation creates or one person creates spills over into multiple people, into multiple generations. They lived it. But God, in His infinite grace, provided another opportunity. Once that generation that rejected God dies off, He comes to their children. And He's got a new leader now. Moses didn't get to go into the promised land. He's got a new leader, Joshua. Joshua has a moment to inspire and encourage faith in the kids whose parents didn't have faith in the moment they needed it the most. And he inspires them to take that step of faith and to enter into the promised land and to wage that war and to fight those battles and to begin to pursue all that God has for them. And they find themselves in that promised land. And the majority of the conquest has happened. And the majority of the battles are kind of fought, but there's still going to be plenty of life to live. And as the book closes out, as Joshua kind of gives one more address to the people, he says this to them as they begin to establish a new life in this new land. He says, now fear the Lord and serve Him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods of that your ancestors worshipped. beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Joshua provides three different options for the people. He's echoing what we're talking about when it comes to worship, but he says it this way: guys, you got three choices as we sit here in the promised land. You can either worship the gods of your past, and that's easy for us to do. There's something tempting about those. There's a reason why those gods were so persuasive. We're some of us more bent than others in certain ways, but those gods of the past are never going to stop trying to woo you. Joshua says you can worship the gods of your past. You can worship the gods of the present culture that you're in. You're not in Egypt anymore. We're in the land of the Amorites. This promised land, it was once inhabited by other people. They've got their own culture, their own gods. The world we live in has its own gods. Every day you're being invited into worship. He says you can worship the gods of your past, you can worship the gods of your culture, or you can worship the one true God. And he makes a declaration for his household, and he says, I'll tell you what, as for me and my house, I'll tell you what we're going to do. And it's not going to be the gods of the past. It's not going to be the gods of the culture. It's going to be the one true God. And just as we've seen that sin can spill over and have generational effect for 3 and 4 generations, so can the blessing and the legacy of grace and serving the Lord. The good news is that the generational curse is not as strong as the generational blessing. And one of the great things that Joshua does for his family, one of the things you can do for your life and for your family, is you can make sure that you break the cycle. And that the definition of generational effect will not be generational curse, but generational blessing. Guys, my family, if I was to be real, we've passed some junk down. I've got it from family. I'm passing it on to my own. I could give you a handful. Maybe what rises to the top: sexual sin, addiction, anxiety, anger. Passing down, passing down, passing down. Every generation has a chance to break that cycle and to pass down not sin but grace, to pass down not despair but hope. One of the greatest things that my parents did was ensure that a generational blessing was passed down, not a generational curse. They're not perfect people. They're not perfect people, but they showed me, among other things, that they needed Jesus too. And that a life lived under his lordship and under his grace has a transformative power to affect not just my life, but my kids' 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 kids. And yours can too. You know, a few weeks ago, a couple months, I guess, ago, this room was full of men for our Uncommon Men's Conference. And we weren't in the story of Moses and the Exodus, but as I told you before, this is a common human refrain, this idolatry problem that we have. So it showed up again in another place in the timeline. We were looking at the story of Gideon, how God used Gideon in a mighty way to take some great steps of faith and to accomplish something that God had for him. But before he could be used in that way, he had to tear down, just like we're talking about now. He had to tear down all the gods of his fathers. He couldn't be used by God. He had to tear them down before they tore him down, before he could be used in a powerful way. See, God won't build onto your life something powerful until he tears down everything that you've built in your life that's not been built by him. We had this moment where we encourage guys to write down on a little wooden shim what their idols were. Maybe even some of the generational things that have been handed down from their fathers. and write those down on this little wooden shim. And symbolically, in a moment of response, we invited them, if they were ready to take a step forward into a new life in a new way, and they're ready to break that cycle, we invited them to break that shim. And when we did that, this room just started snapping like popcorn all the way around. It's a sound that I'll never forget. And man after man after man came forward and just threw those broken pieces of wood, symbolizing those broken idols, into a trash can, symbolizing I'm walking away from that way of life and I'm stepping into the blessing that God has for me. And you may not have in front of you a piece of wood that you can physically snap, but in your mind's eye, you can go there right now. And you can identify the things that are separating you from a sold-out relationship with God. You know what has been placed in front, or what you are valuing on a daily basis and worshiping above Him. And I want to tell you right now that they will never fulfill you. No matter how much they woo you, they will never fulfill you. And I want to invite you today to break them and to worship the one true God, not the God of the past, not the things you've turned to in the past for shelter and rescue that have never fulfilled, not the gods of our culture. They're no better. They're not going to lead you to any more fulfillment, but the one true living God who loved you so much that He would send His only Son to die a substitutionary death in place of you, so that your brokenness and your wrongdoings and your rebellion could be paid for and atoned for, and you could receive grace and freedom and forgiveness. He loved you enough to speak into your life and to say, nothing else will satisfy you like me. So don't pursue those other idols. No idols. You and I are in a mutually exclusive relationship. Let no one else in. Let no one else have that top spot. And watch as we do this and work this out together, as you find the satisfaction that you've looked for in all the other places, but never found it. You will find it in me. He invites you today to respond. I'm going to invite you to stand and to respond as we get ready to worship, to turn your attention to Him in worship, to worship Him with your whole heart, to allow Him to be placed above all other things in your life. If you'd like to talk or pray with somebody as we sing, maybe you're ready to take a step of faith towards Jesus. Maybe you've never said yes to Him. I invite you today to do that very thing. You can do so via the code that's on the screen. You can talk to someone in person on the back wall. I'll be standing. If you're in this room, I will be standing at the back as we sing these next songs. Connect kiosk after service. We want to talk and help you take this step to make God your number one pursuit in life. Will you pray with me, Heavenly Father?